This happened in Michoacan, Mexico. So this guy says that growing up, him and his older brother had to share a room. He says that they had a habit of always staying up till like 11 at night on their phones. He admits that every time he would see his older brother put his phone away, he did too, because he was so scared of laying in the room while his brother was asleep and him on his phone, like surrounded by darkness. He does say that he grew out of that fear of like his brother being asleep and him staying up. So after a few years, he did end up staying up on his phone till like 3 or 4 in the morning. He says that even though he would stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning, sometimes he would get a little bit panicked because we all know that not good things happen around that time. He does say that from time to time his fear would get the best of him, so he would end up putting music on his phone and falling asleep to that. He also admits that there were times where he would remind himself that he was alone, awake, everyone's asleep, total darkness, so he would literally put the blanket over his head and continue to watch videos. Even though his eyes would get red from how tired he was, he almost saw it like a challenge. He wanted to stay awake and like face his fear. So when he was around 7 years old, he says that he stayed up on his phone again, but this time he saw something weird through his window. He says that he kept seeing something like flying back and forth. That he did have a curtain on his window. It was like dark and brown, but at nighttime, since it was much lighter outside, you can see when something darker would pass by, which is how he would see that thing just flying back and forth. He said that at first he wanted to tell himself that maybe there were birds, but the way that he would see it flying back and forth, like it didn't seem like a bird. And also he said that he would almost also see them land on the roof of the house, and when he would try to take a peek, there would be nothing on the roof. He also told himself, like, what if I'm seeing these things because of how late I'm staying up, because he would get tired and he wouldn't go to sleep. But he says that he doesn't think it was him, because there was a time where he actually just removed the whole curtain because he wanted to see what the fuck was flying back and forth, and nothing would fly by and there was nothing on the roof. He doesn't know how he grew the courage to do this, but one of those nights he had a plan. He literally opened the curtain to the point where only one eye was outside and one eye was inside the room, and he stayed there for a good amount of time and nothing passed by. And as soon as he quit, he saw something fly back and forth again. He thought to himself, like, what if they are witches? Like, what if they're messing with me? And of course they would mess with me because I'm 7 years old, and what if they want to take me away? He says that after a while, like whatever it was flying back and forth just became his new norm, and he really didn't worry about it anymore. That was until one night where he was laying in bed on his phone and he heard the craziest animal sounds coming from his dogs and chickens outside. And a few moments after hearing all that, he started to hear something coming from his window. Something that sounded like somebody was in pain, getting closer and closer. He got scared, but immediately opened up that curtain and looked to see what was outside, and again, there was nothing. And even though he didn't see anything outside of his window, his dogs and chickens were still going crazy. In that moment, he was so scared that he decided to pick his phone up and look up a video of like prayers and just let it play throughout the night. He said that in his crazy moment, he picked one and didn't really think about it, and when it started playing, the actual prayer was in Latin, so he didn't really understand what they were saying. He got a little freaked out, but then the priest in the video started talking normal and he understood him, but then the priest would go back into talking into that Latin language and almost like screaming it, so he was like, what the fuck is going on? He said that he was so scared that he didn't even have the energy to like get up, get his phone, change it to something different, because he just couldn't move. And in that moment is when someone on the other end of that room called his name. It was his brother, of course, who had woken up by the sound of that Latin prayer that the priest was screaming. His brother told him to shut that off because instead of sounding like a prayer, it sounded like something satanic, and he needed to turn that shit off now. He scared his brother, and of course he understood how scary it was, because imagine being in deep sleep and you get woken up by a priest screaming something in Latin. I would have had a heart attack. So he shuts it off and tries to go to sleep, even though he continues to see something pass by and hear that weird sound of that thing that was getting closer to his window. The next day, his brother did tell his mom what happened that night. His mom didn't get mad at him, but she did ask why he was trying to play a prayer in the middle of the night. All he told her was that it was because he couldn't go to sleep. He admits that he couldn't tell his mom what he was seeing through the window. It wasn't until years later where this conversation came up in his family, and that's when when he finally admitted to them what he would see at his window. He said his family didn't have this like crazy reaction because they thought the same thing he did when he first saw it, which was that they could have been animals. So again, this was only a few years later, which meant that they were now teenagers and still were in that same room. The family still lived in that same house. So because his family didn't have that big reaction, he was like, I'm gonna prove it to them that this is not an animal. So he decided that that night, when he would see that thing in the window, because he was still seeing it, he was gonna wake his brother up and make him watch with him. Unfortunately, his brother saw nothing and neither did he. Apparently, he believed that that thing would only appear when it was him alone and not when anyone else was watching. And that was the case, because when his brother did fall asleep, he ended up seeing that thing fly back and forth on his window. He also attempted to record what was passing by with his phone, but he says that it was so dark that his phone couldn't even make out the things he was seeing with his own eyes. He says that every night that he goes to sleep and he sees those things, he remembers that time where something was like weeping by his window, getting closer and closer. He says that today he's still living in that house, and fortunately, he hasn't seen anything, but he knows that eventually they're just gonna come back and he's gonna see these things again. He says that as he's typing this story, he is laying in his bed in the middle of the night and he is terrified that he might see them again, and also terrified that they may do something more than just fly through his window. He says he's gonna put his phone away and attempt to go to sleep, and hopes that these witches or whatever it is outside his window will eventually leave him alone. This story comes from Relatos Oscuros, and if you want to listen to it, this is what the video will look like.